Welcome to the Polysite. This is your host, Anthony Lindsay, and
Stephanie Marino.
And we're here with Miss McCool. Hello, Miss McCool. Say hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
We're just looking at your bio a little bit. An LGBT rights activist and speaker, podcast host, author, columnist, and stage performer. Busy.
Yeah, I have a few things going on.
Awesome. Can you give us a little bit of history on what's going on in your life right now?
Sure. Most recently, I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and that's kind of where all this started. I graduated from there in May, but before doing so is when I came out publicly, both by screaming in the face of a hate preacher and by writing a book shortly after the election called The PC Lie, How American Voters Decided I Don't Matter. And that kind of was a bit of an overnight raise in my signal, shall we say. I had been podcasting until that point, but it wasn't until I came out and wrote that book that I would say I started getting noticed beyond a few hundred people. And since then, just long and the short of it, I've been traveling, doing activism, appearing at conventions. I'm just about to put out my 5th book since then. Wow. So I write a lot, and I speak at LGBT conferences, skeptic conferences, and I host the Inciting Incident podcast and either host or co-host on 4 others. So busy was a good word.
Productive. I love it. There's a lot going on.
So when you give these the speeches and you do activism at these college campuses, what is the climate like today? Is it better than it was, say, just a few years ago?
It depends on where I'm going. Most places that invite me, it's through an LGBT center or it's through some kind of humanist organization. So the crowd that come to see me are usually perfectly respectful and nice, and I've made a great number of friends through these appearances, among other things. But when I've gone to things that are more public, once again, it really depends on where it is. And usually the problems I experience aren't at the actual events, it's outside of them. Most notably was Salt Lake City. I was invited to Salt Lake City for Pride by a podcast that's out there, and just walking down the street on a city block, I was shouted at no less than 20 times.
Goodness.
So I would say in more rural areas and certain cities, metropolitan areas, it can be really scary and really hostile. So it's either all or nothing as far as the respect factor goes. Things like being scared of stopping at a rest stop to use the bathroom, depending on what state I'm in, or getting very obvious looks, or seeing that there's a bus at a rest stop and going, I don't think I'm going to stop at this one. Yeah. Those are more the things I have to consider than the places I actually go to speak. Because if they're inviting a trans woman to come and speak, chances are it's going to weed out a lot of the people who would come there to say terrible things.
That's fair.
Sure,
it seems like it would be self-selective. Do you think that the environment has changed after the Trump election, like before and after the Trump election? And are those particular people, the Trump supporters, are those the ones that are yelling from across the street?
Sometimes it is. Those are usually the more obvious ones. The atmosphere since the election, I would say, it isn't as different as it seems, but a lot of hatred and a lot of outright douchebaggery has been emboldened, has been given a platform, has given people a reason to not have to hide behind an anonymous identity. You look at the response of his to the Charlottesville thing, and you have literal Nazis carrying torches, and the president calls them very fine people.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
But if a person of color kneels during the national anthem, they're a son of a bitch. So it's not even hidden anymore. And it doesn't matter if it is or not, because the rhetoric that surrounds it and the emboldening of it anything that's against him is a conspiracy or a lie, fake news. There's always something that is, just thrown out there to keep people from changing behavior or acknowledging anybody else other than their own little circle and themselves. So I don't think it's that much different. I think a lot of different kinds of people are noticing, as opposed to before the election where, say, LGBT activists or people of color or other minorities would speak out, and a lot of well-intended but privileged white people would say, oh, it's not that bad. Most people don't care. That's just the fringe.
That's something I've noticed about Trump as well. Like, if there is one good thing that's happened since the election, it's that I do think some people that were right there on the cusp have gone more towards opening their eyes to what's really going on with like minorities and people that are on the out right now.
Yes, absolutely. There was a friend of mine who spoke at a convention against a well-known alt-right YouTuber. And because of what he was saying, he was booed for talking and booed for trying to define a word. And ever since that appearance, he has been getting mercilessly trolled by these people. And I felt bad for him, and I told him this. But at the same time, I had to kind of say, now you get a taste of what it's like for us every single day, just existing. So I think if, like you said, if there is one good thing about it, even though it's bad behavior and it's horrifying, it's that more people are realizing these are not just small pockets. These are not just like, far outliers. Like, the statistics don't lie. There are an awful lot more people who think this way and believe these things than most people ever thought possible. So if we see that they're not just 5 people at the Westboro Baptist Church and are more like the people you work with or the people that you see every day, I think that's going to wake a lot more people up and realize help them realize how big of a problem it really is.
Right. So how long has it been since you formally came out and then wrote the book?
It hasn't been that long. I first started coming out in 2014.
Okay.
But that was only like at night and at, especially safe places.
Yeah, where you felt, okay to do so.
I started expressing myself more and going to safe places where I could fully be myself. But then unfortunately, I was sexually assaulted twice in 1 week. And that put everything in like this state of being numb, because my feeling at the time was, if this is what it's like for people like me, then I need to hide. And that put me in this state of numbness for a good 2 years. And it wasn't until October last year when this hate preacher was on campus for a second time.
I hope I lose people with this kind of preaching. I hope I lose all the freak, pervert sympathizers. Get out of here! You're destroying America! Bunch of filthy sodomites and queers. I'm the one who has the guts to preach against them. I still hate these sodomites. I still hate these haters of God and these vile perverters of the flesh. And I'll stand up to them. And I stood up to them then, and I'm going to stand up to them now. Look, who thinks it's a hard decision if some faggot wants you to make him a wedding cake?
Something clicked, and it was kind of an epiphany. And, being 31, I was on a college campus. I'm older than the typical college student. But this hate preacher was not just like yelling into a megaphone. He was following people and calling them slurs and harassing them and like really upsetting them. Oh. And my thought was, I don't care what this man has to say. If he yells at me, he's not going to yell at anybody else, because I'm 31. I don't care. These are 18-year-old kids who don't deserve to be called sluts for having bare shoulders. Like, that was the kind of rhetoric he was spewing. So after about an hour and a half of just getting in his face and, yelling back at him and just challenging everything he said, I yelled in his face, "I'm transgender, fuck you." And it was on video, and it kind of went viral in my circles. So I was put in a position where it's like, well, I have to come out now. They've seen it. And then right after the election, especially because I went to the same school as Trump, so I was surrounded by that rhetoric and everything going on constantly. Like, even every visiting football team would have their halftime show dedicated to making fun of us for Trump. I mean, we couldn't escape it. It was six days after the election, and I was sitting in class, and I just started typing. And before I knew it, I looked down and I had 30 pages. So I was like, I need to make a book out of this. And I contacted someone who is now my friend, Chris Cluey, the former punter for the Minnesota Vikings, who kind of went viral for becoming a same-sex marriage activist in Minnesota back in 2012. Asked him to do the foreword. He said, sure. I wrote the book in 9 days, had a bunch of people contribute essays to how they were feeling in the immediate election aftermath, and I had it out before the end of the year. So that was kind of my kicking down the closet door, so to speak.
Yeah, I've heard the way that you've spoken about that experience writing that particular book. You mentioned that the anger that initially came out as raw ranting turned into a hyper-focused call to arms. I wish I had that kind of organization to my like scatterbrained thoughts. Like, that's wonderful. And I imagine it happens when you get just that upset about something. You almost can't stop yourself.
Yeah. I remember
feel?
very well that weekend after the election. I was on a road trip down to Florida. I was living in Pennsylvania at the time. And just everybody that I knew was terrified. And one of the first places to be hit with, there were Nazi symbols going up everywhere. There were a lot of white supremacists coming out of the woodwork. And then it was either that weekend or that Monday. Someone hacked into the Penn email database or Facebook or something and put all the black freshmen in a lynching group. And it was like, holy shit, they're not going to wait until he's in office to start doing this stuff. I need to speak up now. And that 30-page rant sort of came out of that immediate atmosphere. And after that rant, what I tried to do was walk it back a little bit, give context to who I was, where I had come from, why I had never published anything under this name before, but also everything I was seeing and what I thought we could do to move forward and at least put up resistance, if not change hearts and minds. And my mission was sort of to be visible, to help trans people in general be visible, because there aren't a lot of us who are. And generally when we're represented, it's by cis actors playing a part. And what I've tried to do is amplify voices of trans people all over the world, and specifically in the country, because we don't get that chance. I'm one of the lucky ones who just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and now I have a fairly decent audience.
So what is cis? You refer to cis a few times. I'm not sure what that is.
Cisgender is the opposite of transgender. You identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. So if you're born a man and you're called a man and you identify as a man, you're cisgendered. So what I mean in that particular criticism is often when a trans person is portrayed in a movie or a TV show, it's by someone who is not trans portraying that part.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is it gives the illusion that it's just putting on clothes and pretending to be something else. And that's harmful. And there's also a lot of trans actors out there who could easily step in and do that part. But you don't see, Neil McDonough stepping in and suddenly playing Madonna in a movie. That would be ridiculous. It's the same thing. If you have a trans person you're trying to portray, like the movie about Stonewall, that riot was started by a trans woman of color. And that wasn't even acknowledged. The fact is, we're trying to not only have our stories told, but told by the people who experience them, as opposed to people who don't have that experience trying to interpret them or perform it.
Makes sense. So there's a line to be drawn between the cisgender people who want to bring awareness to it, but at some point you got to draw a line because they simply can't go all the way with it. They can't drive the point home without fully knowing and being in the light.
Well, not just that, but you have someone who is one gender playing someone who is a different one. So it just subconsciously puts in that idea that being trans is something that you can just do or perform, or that someone could possibly relate to it. Like I said, you wouldn't have a cis man play a cis woman. It's same idea. Having a cis person play a trans person is having them play a different gender. And
so
with a majority of people in this country who think that we're just acting or just putting on a dress and calling ourselves women or men in the other direction or anything in between, it doesn't help our visibility and trying to get our true stories out.
All underlying the healthcare issues, the employment issues, the murder and violence issues is the presumption that we are always and only the gender that we were assigned at birth, and therefore we should be treated as oh God, I'm about to get way too real here. Some human being, I was about to say something, wrote that people have been writing, that I'm mentally ill, that trans people are mentally ill. So that kind of stigmatizing, right, continues to perpetuate mythology that we are somehow deranged and mentally ill, and there is a reason then to discriminate against us.
Yes.
Even if somebody were mentally ill, it does not mean that they need to be beaten to death on the street.
I was looking into how it refers to transsexualism as a sexual disorder, complete with formally established diagnostic criteria. What am I missing here? Can you give me your thoughts on that and what you feel as it being considered a psychological disorder?
Well, it's no longer considered a disorder. The most recent DSM-5, I forget what that book is called.
Yeah, the DSM-5.
Yes, it's listed, but it's not a disorder anymore. And that's often that some people try to refer to us as having a mental disorder, and that trans is a mental disorder. And the fact is, even if it was, which it isn't, but even if it was, that's not an excuse to treat us the way some people do.
Not. Yeah.
Some people say, trans is a mental disorder, therefore we deserve to, beat you up or kill you for being who you are or give you less rights or take away your autonomy. And, that's being an asshole for two reasons, because it's not only being, anti-trans, but it's being ableist as hell. So,
of course.
Ableist. What is that? Ableist. That's the second time I've heard that. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and I heard someone refer to
hating on
ableist.
disabled people, anyone with a mental or physical disorder.
Oh, okay.
Right. Like saying vaccines cause autism, for instance. That comes from a place of ableism because it inherently implies that autism is bad, or that any kind of physical or mental disability or anything like that, by demeaning it, by condescending to it, by making it a thing.
Yeah.
That because inherently people do condescend to people in wheelchairs or people who have depression or any kind of disorder like that. That's ableism.
Yeah,
it's
sometimes
someone
subconsciously even.
Right. So essentially, even if it was, like I said, even if it was a mental disorder, which it's not, it doesn't mean we deserve to be treated the way some people think we do.
Of course not. Would you still say that therapy is a good idea for those who are maybe trying to come to terms with it and things like that?
Absolutely. And a lot of people who get hormone treatments have to go through what's called informed consent,
right,
which is they either do their own research or they go in knowing that there are side effects that come with getting hormones, and often they're just given to them. But in other places, it's usually a statewide thing. They have to go through a certain amount of time with a psychiatrist in order to obtain hormone treatments and, of course, physical surgeries. It depends on where you are and the state laws within that place. Some states you can just go to Planned Parenthood and say, I want hormones, and they go, well, it's on you if you didn't read what this can change. For me, I was fortunate enough to be at a campus that has an LGBT inclusive healthcare plan. Okay. So I was able to go to the one doctor on campus who can prescribe those things and tell him that I wanted to transition. And he wrote me a prescription and that was it. But my husband, who is a trans man, had to go through months of seeing a psychiatrist to get testosterone, mostly because testosterone can also be sought as a steroid. So it's different for different people, it's different for different genders, and it's different depending on where you live.
Well, do you see it as kind of a bad thing, as in it's a requirement? You already knew, you had your mind set. Did you feel like you needed therapy?
I felt like therapy was necessary for the effects of being open in society, not for being trans, but for the fact that I could walk into any bathroom and be attacked or assaulted or harassed. Okay, and even on a campus that brags about its inclusivity policies and the fact that it protects people with gender identity as a specifically protected class, I still got harassed in the bathroom by a security guard. That was the last thing that happened to me on campus. And there's a long way to go. Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot that people have to do in addition to just saying they're allies or just saying that they're on our side or just saying that they include LGBT specific protections. Because if there's no one there to actually help you, then just saying it isn't enough. And having those resources available is so important, which is part of the reason that we try to be so loud and so visible so that we can point people toward those resources, because they're not exactly well advertised.
No, they're
Not at all. So one of the problem with the activism in the LGBT community, LGBTQ community, is the fact that like a lot of your issues get bottlenecked into the most controversial one, where you guys may stand for 50 different things that everyone would agree, like, obviously that should be a thing. But then the one thing that everyone will focus on is the bathroom bill. And that will push a lot of people from the middle to the right, where it's like, oh, I just don't want this bathroom bill to go through. And that's the most controversial. So in that particular case, in the bathroom bill, like, how do you stand? Where do you stand on that being one of the central issues? And do you think that like other things should be the primary focus as far as the activism goes?
Well, the bathroom bill was kind of thrown at us as a reason that it drove people away. But what even people on supposedly our side forgot to point out was that we didn't start that. We didn't rise up and say, we want to use the bathroom that matches our assigned gender. We already did that. It was only when the gay marriage fight was lost in the Supreme Court that conservatives went, well, we lost that fight. Let's go after these people. And meetings were had to discuss that, and it was not exactly transparent. So they came out with that, and the same rhetoric that they used to use against gay people, that they were child molesters, that they were perverts, they started applying to us. And because for some reason there's this competitive toxic masculinity that runs throughout this country, they focused on trans women as not only being dangerous, but being in the bathroom with your wife or with your daughter, and that we're dangerous. And they'd spread a meme from people of Walmart as if that's what a trans person is. And it stirred up a lot of subconscious bigotry in people. And then the people on our side, like say Bill Maher, for instance, turned around and blamed the election of Trump on us.
This is exactly the kind of culture war issue that rousts a certain type of voter out of their trailers on Election Day. Let's not die on this hill, because I've seen this movie before.
So it was kind of like, okay, they started that, we defended ourselves, and now you're blaming it on us for us going, hey, could you not harass us in bathrooms or patrol bathrooms? And the fact that it bothered people was a sign of how well the propaganda machine worked. But trans people use the bathroom like everybody else. We go in, we go out, we don't talk to anybody. Like, it's not a thing. Nobody hangs out in there.
I don't make a habit either of like discussing anything about my personal life with bathroom strangers. So,
and if you're following someone into the bathroom and demanding to know what may or may not be under their pants, that's not on the trans person. That's on you.
That's fair enough.
And you mentioned in one of your interviews that you felt as if you were constantly being laughed at or judged at as a tall and full-statured woman. I think as women, we're kind of all experiencing that feeling sometimes, if we're being honest. So like, what do you suggest to combat these feelings? No matter what your background is, how do we get over what society tells us we should look like as women?
I say that you are valid. You have more of a right to your identity than anybody else. And anybody who is using physical attributes as a reason to mistreat you or not take you seriously or devalue you isn't worth the time of day. You know, we are valid in who we are and what we have to say, no matter what we look like. And some of us were not born women. Some of us were assigned a different gender at birth and had to come out about who we are. That doesn't make us less valid. It doesn't make us mentally ill. And it doesn't mean that we're any less women. So it runs across the board of non-men and anybody in general that we don't deserve to treat people like that and hold this gatekeeping standard of what someone has to look like to be attractive or to be taken seriously or to have a valid opinion and to deal with not having harassment. We don't deserve to be harassed no matter what we look like. We don't deserve to be assaulted no matter what we look like or what we're wearing. And we don't deserve to have people constantly shifting the goalposts and gatekeeping just because they don't think that we are women enough or that we don't look a certain way.
There's a silent epidemic, at least the way I see it, where 40% of transgender youth say they had attempted suicide. Like, for those who are in transition, who feel that they were born with the wrong sex, who have not come out, like, what would you say to them? Like, what is your advice to the community that is still in the closet?
My advice to anyone who is either still in transition or in the closet is that no one has more of a right to your identity than you are. You are not broken. You are not mentally ill. You are not wrong for how you feel. And you are valid in who you are. You are who you say you are, and nobody can take that away from you. But don't be unsafe about it. If you're in a place where coming out may get you thrown out of the house or may have you lose your job, I understand if you have to stay in the closet. And I get emails from people every single day who say they're in that situation. Don't risk your own safety as much as you possibly can. Like I said, I'm one of the lucky ones. I was in a school that protected us, and I'm economically rather well off by comparison. And the suicide epidemic, a lot of people use that as why we shouldn't let trans people be who they are, without realizing that it's not because we're trans that there's so many suicide attempts. It's because we are trans and people treat us like shit that a lot of people feel bullied into suicide attempts. And regardless of whether you understand us, regardless of whether you can quote unquote get it, we are valid and we are human. And you don't even have to agree with us to call us the name and pronoun that we ask you to. So even if you don't think that I'm a real woman, quote unquote, my legal name is Marissa and my ID says female on it. And even if it didn't, that's what I asked you to call me. And that is basic human respect.
So I heard that exact argument against people like Ben Shapiro, who refuse to call people in transition by their chosen sex. So like Ben Shapiro will say that, no, you were born a male, like you have male genitalia, you are a man, I'm not calling you she. And like I like looked up like what was the counter argument to that? Like, what do you guys say? And the response to that was like, just be decent. Like, I've decided that like I'm a female. Like I am in transition. Like, why would you not? Like, you're being mean
for no reason. Like, it's common courtesy. If someone called me a mister, I would be offended. And if I asked them, hey, real quick, I'm Miss. Like usually they'd be like, oh, okay, my bad. But
it's that easy. All you have to. There are two things. Just call us what we ask you to. It's not that hard.
That's fair.
And two, you do not have more of a right to our identity than we do. Right. If I say I'm who I am, I'm who I am. You don't get to tell me otherwise. And people's genitals do not determine who they are any more than, say, a man who was in a car accident is disfigured because of the accident and loses his reproductive organ. He's not less of a man because he lost that. Yep. And just because we aren't born with a certain genitalia doesn't mean that we aren't valid in who we are, and we don't necessarily have to get the surgery to correct it to pass by his standards or anyone else who wants to hold the you're born as what you are, especially because they tend to forget intersex people in that. But that's a different conversation altogether.
Oh,
you got a podcast on that one?
I don't know what that is. I don't know.
Intersex are people who are born with either parts of both or both completely, or chromosomes that are different than XXXY. It's that talk about invisible in the community. That's one that's rather invisible and not talked about, the same as non-binary genders or sexualities that are beyond gay or bi. So there's plenty more. Gender is a spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum. Mm-hmm. It's more than just a yes or no. And I think, if nothing else, a lot more people are understanding that you aren't necessarily what you were assigned at birth, and it's not always as simple as gay, straight, man, woman, yes, no.
At the crux of it, it's like kind of mind your own dang business anyway. I don't know, from my perspective, I'm not walking around asking anyone what they've got in their pants.
So that's it. That's our podcast with Marissa McCool. Ms. McCool, where can they find you? What's your Twitter handle?
Well, my Twitter handle is Riss McCool, RISMCCOOL. That's also my website, rissmccool.com. You can find me on the Book of Faces, Marissa Alexa McCool, and all my podcasts. The main one, the most popular one, is the Inciting Incident podcast. That's reached 115 episodes now. And if you just search my name on Amazon or, my website, you can find the books I've written, or put it into your podcast app. You'll find the podcast that I'm on and the countless number that I have guested on. I've not been quiet, especially in the last year, so I'm not hard to find.
Should you be? You've been incredibly helpful, and we appreciate you taking the time with us.
All right, so subscribe on iTunes to the Polysite Podcast. Again, subscribe on iTunes, Polysite Podcast, and tell 2 friends about the Polysite Podcast. And thanks for having us. All right, well, bye, Ms. McCool.
Thank you so much for having me.
Later.
Bye.